Hey guys, this is Mark. Welcome to the Basic Approval Sample Flow. In this series, we review sample flows included with FlowRunner. Every flow has a documentation page, but there's also a video where we describe step by step everything that is going on in the flow, how it is implemented. And by watching these videos, you can learn FlowRunner internals. And with that knowledge, you can build your own automations. Basic approval flow is quite simple, but it reviews a scenario that is very common and quite often used in samples for the automation systems. So let's take a look at the actual scenario and what's going on from the procedural perspective, and then we will switch to FlowRunner to see how that flow is actually implemented. The flow starts when an employee fills out a form, which is a web page form, and submits a time off request. And in our case, it's going to be a simple form where the employee says that I want to take time off starting from this date to that date and provides a justification. Then the form is submitted. It is saved in a database, so there is a log of all the time off requests. And then another email is sent to a manager. And in that email, it says, hey, such and such employee is asking for time off. Would you like to approve it or reject it? And the manager can choose either between approval or rejection. And then if they reject, they provide a justification or explanation for why it is being rejected. Regardless whether it's approval or rejection, an email is generated with the manager's decision, and that email is sent to the employee, letting them know whether their request was approved or rejected. Very simple. So in the basic approval flow that we are going to be reviewing, all of this is implemented using both capabilities that are in FlowRunner, and for UI pages, we use UI Builder. However, any UI technology can be used for that matter. UI Builder, of course, makes it easier to integrate FlowRunner into the actual processes. So let's take a look and go back to our flow to see how it is implemented. So here in our flow, as you can see, it starts with this trigger that is labeled new request submitted. That trigger is an instance of the app logic trigger. So here in the toolbox, if you go to triggers, you'll see this is the very first app logic trigger. It is an interesting trigger. Whenever you use it in your flow, it will automatically generate a codeless block in UI Builder and actually in server-side logic that will give you an ability to initiate or activate your flow. So flow is running. It's basically sitting and waiting for that event to occur. And whenever something happens in the UI, you can use that codeless block that is linked directly to this trigger to activate that trigger. And once we review this flow, we'll switch to UI Builder and take a look at the implementation of those time off request forms so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But for now, let's just say that this is a special trigger that will also provide an ability to initiate or activate this trigger from a UI page. So once this flow is activated, meaning that the user has submitted their form, okay? And by the way, whenever they submit that form, the data in that form will be referenced in this flow as request data. So here for this trigger, you can specify how the data from that trigger is being referenced, the request data, okay? Then after that, there is a new block. We haven't discussed it before in other videos, called set variables. So set variables essentially just provides a way to establish some well-known variables, sort of like little pockets of information that have well-known names. So here, one of the variables is going to be called email signature. And the value for this is this multi-line text editor. So if we switch to expression editor, you see the signature This is the guy that we're using, multi-line text. So if you drag it here, double click, and then you can give it a name, signature, and just provide any text. So this is a multi-line that is here because this signature will be used later on in these emails. So here there's just, we set it once and then we can just reuse this variable. Workspace domain is another variable that needs to be configured by you to make to get this flow working. Okay, so while we're here, let's also configure it since we're already at this spot. So for this, click Manage, and in here you will get your backend list subdomain. Copy this, okay, and then let's go back to FlowRunner. So here, set variables, and then workspace subdomain. Just paste it right here. Okay, this is also needed in one of the steps here. We will get there for the reason that we want to reference a web page. Actually, whenever it's sent to the manager, there's going to be a link in the email, and that link needs to reference the actual domain or of this workspace where the flow is running. You can configure as many variables as you need, and now you know that variables gives you an ability to do this. Whenever you click plus, you get both payer's name and value, and that's how you configure your variables. Okay. So once the variables are configured, the next step we follow down the line is to save a record in a database. So everything that we receive from our form will be saved in a database table called time of request. This database table defines the following columns: email, from, to, and description. From and to is going to be the dates range. Email is the email address of the person requesting time off, and description is going to be the explanation of why they need a time off request. Okay, so all of this is saved in the table time of request. If you want to see that table and see how it is structured, just click on quick access and then go to database, and you will see that table in there. Okay, so once the data is saved in a database, then we need to send an email to the manager. And then for this, we're using this send message block. That block comes from the Gmail integration. Right here, we have Gmail integration. If you created a brand new blank workspace, this will not show up in here. You just need to go to Marketplace. And in here, you will get a list of all the integrations. Gmail is here. You will get the install button. So just install Gmail, and you will have exactly the same block. That is going to be called, let's see, send message, this guy right here. So what's going on inside of this send request or send message? First of all, you will need to specify the email address of the person that will be the manager. And whenever you're playing with this, just put in your email address. So you are going to be both employee and the manager, and you will understand how it works just to keep things simple. Or if you want to have two different email addresses, one for the employee and the other for the manager, that's fine. The subject of the email is going to be new time of request submission. And then here's the body content. So let's take a look at the body content. Message is the multi-line text editor. Here it says, hello, you have new time of request submission. You can review it here. Okay, so that's the thing. Then we have this default domain, the workspace domain. That's the variable that we have configured. I just noticed that in here, we will, since this is going to be building a URL, we will need to go back to our variable and put in HTTPS in front of it because it did not have it in there. Then there's going to be a reference to the actual page that is deployed in this workspace, and that one is just static text with all the parameters that are needed. It passes execution ID. So this is going to be it's getting a little more complicated. Execution ID is a special element right here. Okay, you can see it right here under flow context, and it uniquely identifies that specific instance of the flow. So flow could be running, but it could have multiple instances. If you think about like multiple parallel threads that are running, and every single execution of the flow will have its unique ID, and that is execution ID. The reason why we need to pass this execution ID is because once this email is sent out and the manager could take some time to review it, it may not be necessarily instantaneously, okay? This instance of Flow that is actually reviewing submission from that specific employee is sitting and waiting, okay? And we will need to wake up that specific instance, because if, Bob submitted time off request, and it was sent to a manager, then the manager decided that Bob will get their time off, then we want to notify Bob via email that their request is approved. And meanwhile, if Joe submitted time off request and then manager rejected it for Joe, then we want to wake up the flow that is processing information from Joe and send the email to Joe. So the way we identify that actual context of that flow execution is by referencing this execution ID. This execution ID will be used in the web page that is operated by the manager. And that's how we basically passing on that control to the web page, saying, hey, whenever you're done, whenever your user is done deciding to approve or to reject, let me know using that specific execution ID, what the resolution is. So that's quite important, okay? Then we're also passing, you see this save request object ID, okay? And that is a reference to a database record created, right? We save the database, and then the result is this request. So then in here, in that email, we're referencing that passing object ID. So this will also be used by the page that is operated by the manager, because it will go to the database and will fetch the data identified by this object ID. So the manager will know exactly whose time off request they are reviewing. And finally, we're using the variable with the signature that we have set up earlier. So that's the body, and it has a lot of concepts here. Before we go any further, let's go back and modify this value. This value will have to be https:// simply because it is being used in here to point to that web page. So email is sent, and we're basically sitting and waiting for the manager to make the decision. In this flow, this implementation goes into triggers group, and this one is interesting. Okay, so triggers group is a group of triggers. It could have multiple triggers in here, and let's step into here. And as you can see, we have two triggers. Both are app logic triggers. So there is request approved and request rejected. Okay, and then one of these will activate the flow. Notice that the triggers group has a special configuration called outgoing transition mode. And this one is really, really cool, because in here you can say whenever any one of the triggers that is located in this group is activated, then let the flow run. Let it continue. So here it says when at least one trigger occurs, then the outgoing transition will happen. Another option, you can say that when all triggers start. So you basically could have multiple things that are happening at the same time, okay? Or within certain time. Here you see, you can basically specify the time frame, like within certain time when all those triggers will happen. It doesn't apply here, by the way, but I'm just pointing out the possibilities that exist in FlowRunner. So when it comes to timing and managing how that flow continues, FlowRunner, it does a fantastic job to do this, as this demonstrates. But anyways, we'll go back to the way it was. So in here, notice that the result of this trigger group is called approved or denied. Okay, and you will see why we will need that. But just know that inside of this trigger group, there are two triggers, and one of them will trigger either request approved or request rejected. After that, we go to this block, and this one is called value router. Very cool block that works like this. So you basically give it a value to evaluate. And notice that the value that we provide is called approved or denied. It's the result of the trigger group. Okay, so this one is approved or denied. And notice that the result of the trigger group has a property called source. Okay, it's just going to be there. So whenever you have trigger group, you give it a name, there will be a property source. And that property will have a value of the actual trigger that has triggered the flow execution. Okay, so notice that inside of the trigger group, we have request approved, request rejected. Inside of this value router, we're evaluating the source, and then the value is request approved or request rejected. So these guys here, they reference the actual trigger that has activated the flow when we were waiting for the manager's decision. Whenever value is request approved, the branch name or case is going to be called approved, this guy right here. When the request is rejected, the case or the branch is going to be called denied, and this is the connector. If something happened and it's not any one of these, although in our case it's impossible. However, it's in FlowRunner, there's a built-in case or branch called everything else. We saw something similar with AI router. There was everything else. And this is sort of a catch-all when neither one of the provided values were matched. So all three would need to have a successor block, just so FlowRunner knows how to continue the execution. If the request is approved, so this case, okay, then it will use this block to send an email. The subject of it will be time off decision. It goes out to the email that was specified in the original form. And then the message here will say, hello, your time off request has been approved. Okay, so this is what's sent here. If it's denied, then the email is sent, it says time off decision, and then the email message will say your time off request has been rejected and provides rejection reason. Okay, how does it know rejection reason? Notice that there is request rejected data, and then there is a property reason. You may ask, where did this request rejected data block come from? Okay, well, here it is, request rejected data. Well, guess what? Inside of the trigger group, we have this request rejected. The trigger data, whatever activated this trigger, is referenced in FlowRunner as request rejected data. So we can go back to triggers group and use a trigger that was used to reactivate this flow, and that is request rejected. And any event data that activated the trigger will be referenced in the flow as request rejected data. So now in this email, request rejected data also has a property called reason, and that property is set by the UI page that was used to reject. And then finally, there is a email signature that we include from the variables. Now notice in the variables, it says default -email signature. So this default is something that I want to mention. If we go back to set variables, notice that these are the variables that are set. But there is also a property called data bucket. And this data bucket by default says default. You can have multiple data buckets. And data bucket is really just symbolically, it is a bucket of data that hosts different variables. You could have multiple data buckets. You could call one configuration or another user preferences, whatever makes sense conceptually. You can group your variables into a data bucket. And whenever you access data in expression editor, in here, all the variables are going to be in this section following this pattern. It will show the name of the data bucket and then the actual variable name that will contain the data that you put into that variable. Finally, for the everything else branch, as you can see, the action is log message, and it uses an action that comes from the marketplace from Flow Logger. This is the action, and you can install it from marketplace as Gmail and many others. The way this works is when you use log message, you will see this configure button. And when you press the configure button, it will ask you for the session code. So the question is, where do you get that session code from? And in order to get session code, you need to use a separate browser tab and navigate in that browser tab to logger.flowrunner.ai. As you can see right here, logger.flowrunner.ai. When you navigate to this page for the very first time, it will display a 5-digit code. So you need to copy this code and use the configure button to put this code in here. Okay. Okay, and you need to do it only once in any of the log message actions. What's going to happen is whenever your flow runs, or whenever you use the test mode if needed, whatever you put in the log message, and this could use expression editor. So you can create more complex data messages to be sent. This data will be sent to the logger screen, and it's very useful for debugging or whenever you're experimenting, whenever you want to have visual feedback from the execution of your flow. So that's it as far as all the blocks that exist in this flow. Now let's configure this flow and run it and see the basic approval in action. To configure the flow, you will see any blocks that miss some data. There is real-time validation for the accuracy of the flow. It will display in numbers like this. So this block is missing 2 data points, and there is 1 right here. So let's select this one, and as you can see, one of them is going to be the to address. This is the sending email to manager. In this case, I will be the manager, so I will just use the same email address for the employee and for the manager. It's just going to keep things simple. And also the OAuth connection is required. For the OAuth connection, you will need to click the login button. And at this point, our Gmail integration is still going through the Google review. So you will get a pop-up that says, this hasn't been approved yet, like all that stuff. There is going to be a way, it will say something like, return to backendless.com, and in this case, it will just let you to proceed to actually authenticate yourself. Clearly, we're not stealing any data. God forbid. This is nothing but an integration with Google, and create your connection, and this way you'll be able to use this block. So I'm going to authenticate myself using backendless.com, and that's the connection that I will use. So here I'm signing in as with my email address, granting all these permissions, and that's it. The connection has been established. So this block is good. For this one, I just need to select the existing connection, and the same thing here. So this connection will actually be, this is the account from where the emails are going to be sent from. And they will be sent to whatever the email that is specified in the request data. At this point, everything is good in the flow. Autosave is on. So whenever you make any changes, it is automatically saved. So I can just start the flow. Now it is running. To see the flow in action, there is a link to a web page that kicks off the flow. So let's just run that page and see it working, and then we will take a look at how that page is implemented. For this, let's go back to Flow Manager. This screen will change. So if you see that it looks different whenever you watch this video, it has been redesigned, but all the functionality will be there. So just locate basic approval. It's going to be like in a list on the left-hand side. And in the instructions, there will be a link to open the UI page to run the flow. So click that link. And this is the time off request. And in here, I'm going to say this is going to be from mark@backendless.com. And I'll be taking time off from January 20th till, let's say, January 24th. And their description is need a break. Submit. So now that data has been submitted. To see what happened in the flow, well, let's just review. This was triggered, this was done, and then everything else was actually done. But at the very minimum, let's just check if that data was saved in the database. And for this, click Quick Access under Backend Development Data Service Database. And then this is the table, time off request. And as you can see here, the data that I entered in the form is now in the database. Okay, so at this point, an email has been sent out to the manager. Okay, and in my example, I am the manager. So let me show you the email that has arrived, and this is the email. Notice this is the link that the FlowRunner has composed, and it has the domain name that points to my workspace, all the IDs and everything else. So now if I click this link, it will open another form where the manager can either approve or reject the time off request. And that's what I get right here. So this is the request. One thing that I noticed is that it doesn't have the field that shows the email address of the person that is submitting, but that is in the database. It's just a matter of fixing that form. It's beyond the point. The point is just to show the overall workflow. So I'm reviewing this as a manager, say, okay, it looks good. I'm going to approve. So now the request has been approved. And that will trigger another email that now goes to the employee, indicating that the time off decision has been made. And that email just arrived, and here it is. So it says your time off request has been approved. Okay, so now you have seen this flow in action. In fact, if we go back to Flow Manager and go to the analytics, like click the analytics icon, we see that there was one run. It shows you the percentages of the execution, like all the paths that it went through. If we go to instances, this is the instance completed. It ran for 1 minute, 40 seconds. Part of it is because we took some time to make the decision. And then if we click on the actual instance, we can see exactly which blocks have executed. Okay, and this is actually pretty cool because anywhere where there is a check mark, that block has executed. Like we can follow along and we see that this approved. It was approved, so this ran. And if you go to this check mark, it will tell you exactly how long each block ran. Okay, so the decision value router took 14 milliseconds, and then in the trigger group, that's the longest, 1 minute, 37 seconds. So FlowRunner captures every single little detail. Like for everything, it will tell you the input parameters and the output parameters. So we maintain very high degree of capturing all the details that make up a flow. So now one thing that is left to be done is to review the design of the UI pages. Now, one thing that I want to remind is right here, this new request submitted is an app logic trigger. This app logic trigger is used in the web page that submits the actual time off request. And then inside of the trigger group, there are 2 additional app logic triggers. So the concept is going to be exactly the same. And to save time, let's just review how this app logic trigger works. It's called new request submitted. Let's go to UI Builder. And in here, let's find the page that is called time off request. Here's the page. So for this, just move the mouse pointer over here in this area. In the pages, click here and then scroll down to find time off request. So this is the design of the page for the time off request. The button here, actually the form, so if you click the button, then you will be able to see the request form. So this is the entire form, and it has codeless logic. So if we open this logic, notice that this codeless block, it says run app logic trigger new request submitted. This is the part that I was talking about early on when at the start of this video. This is our basic approval flow. Notice that for every app logic trigger, and there are 3 in our case in that flow. One is the request submitted, and then request approved, request rejected. For every single app logic trigger, this codeless block is created. Okay, and this codeless block is unique to that flow for that specific block in that flow. So in here, whenever form is being submitted, we activate that flow, okay, and we're passing the form data. So the form data becomes available to the flow, and the rest is just error handling right here. So request is submitted, and then we're transferring to another page. So the most important thing that I wanted to show is the usage of this block that wakes up the flow and starts the flow execution. And with that, it's a wrap. So now we have reviewed completely the basic approval workflow. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, please contact us through our support forum, support.backendless.com. Once again, thank you for watching this video. And as always, happy automating.